The Homewood district is located in the Willard Hay neighborhood in North Minneapolis and contains 254 properties. In 2016, the neighborhood was nominated to be a local historic district, and in February of 2017, the Heritage Preservation Commission recommended that Homewood be approved for designation. The neighborhood is unique in that over the decades, it has offered a variety of social and economic histories that led to the historic district nomination.
The one that was actually on the designation form was because of the Jewish history within the neighborhood. It was platted for and settled by Jewish Minneapolitans back in the early 1900s. And I think the period of significance went until 1948 or something like that. What the designation study didn't talk about was the later history.
And the question was asked, why are we celebrating the history of 1911 to 1949, all of those people are gone. We are the ones who are here, and we've contributed this community, and nothing is being said about us.
Because of the larger influx of Black residents later in the 60s and 70s and other times, white Jewish families moved out, many of whom went to St. Louis Park. So then who took over this historic housing stock? It was mostly the Black middle class. Who came in to maintain it and build family there.
Many of us feel that what's happened in the last 50 years is as historic as what happened earlier.
And we had a community that's very significant, but has had a lot of alterations. And so the design guidelines, as they're being developed, would address future alterations.
For me, the process seemed open and fair all the way through, and that there was enough information for any family or any resident who wanted to become a part of it or attend meetings or get questions answered. I think it was always possible to have that.
They did paper mailings and email and, all that kind of thing. And so, the more active people in the neighborhood tended to find out about it. But, people are busy with their daily lives. Many of them, I suspect, did not.
Quite a few of the people in the community didn't understand what was happening, what a designation process was, what the design guidelines were for. Again, when you're working with a large district, it's hard to get everybody at the table.
I think they could have brought the topic up before making the proposal in a lot of neighborhood contexts and raised awareness of a lot of people before making the proposal. As opposed to, from my point of view, the proposal was made and then, felt like it was dropped on us.
But then you had to have residents spend all this extra time and energy to make sure their voices were heard, where I argue that should have happened on the front end. It should never even got to that place, in my humble opinion. The community engagement process should look very different.
We offered this space for community meetings so that the designation could be explained and talked about and people could have their questions answered.
A lot of people from the community came to the meeting. I wasn't expecting that, but I was very impressed that they are very interested in their community, both for and against the designation.
There's a lot of notions of fear on both sides, but for very different reasons. And historic designation as a tool had become a tool to further affirm some of those fears.
People felt that, the very specific things about what the guidelines called for and what you could do to your house and so on were very restrictive and would affect the cost of maintaining a house.
People thought, well, what if I can't afford to do it the way the historic designation says I have to do it? Then what do I do about that house? Or do I just let it go bad?
Well, now because of the historic nature of the homes and the kind of architectural style of the homes, there's this new attention drawn to the space. Many residents were like, this historic designation will make it impossible for Black families in particular to continue to invest in this community if the architectural standards require me to only go through certain contractors. It required me to pay a certain amount versus allowing me to use whatever contractor I want or do it myself. There are these common narrative frames that you expect to hear when talking about gentrification. It's increased presence of whiteness, it's increased housing costs, whether it's property values or rents increasing, There's displacement fears. Folks talk about both real displacement, whether it's family or friends being unable to stay in the neighborhood, and or some of their cultural places and spaces moving.
Gentrification has been something that we have feared since we've been here for 40 years. It surprisingly has not happened to the degree that we had feared yet, although housing prices are going up again since the recession. And that affects who can afford to buy houses and so on.
But according to the research John Smalley shared with us, that's not always true. Designating alone a historic district doesn't always change the value of the housing or the value of living in the community.
Right, on one end, I'm afraid that I won't ever be able to afford to stay here as property values increase and more white families move into Homewood, because that is the reality.
A historic district, to my knowledge, probably would not address the simple change in demographics based on the economics and so on. That's something that it's hard to resist and probably is impossible to resist.
I am in favor of the historic designation because I believe the community is unique and the housing stock in our community is beautiful. That there is something to say about the way it looks now, and it's 100 years after it was developed. I'd like for it 100 years from now to have some of the same flavor. I wouldn't like to see it interspersed with new construction or multifamily dwellings.
My main motivation for my qualified support for the proposal is that the historic designation would give the neighborhood more say in what happens when there's a significant land use change.
I don't support it. For me, I want to ensure that everyone can benefit from the historic nature of any of our communities. And I also want to make sure that folks like me can buy and live in these communities. This will make it really challenging. I think homeowners should have the right to decide what windows they're going to put in their homes based on what they can afford to do.
I think in September, the city council decided to, I don't know if they formally tabled it or what their formal action was, but they asked for city staff to start looking at financial incentives and ways to help the community with their concerns about the designation process. And as I understand, in February of this year, the designation basically fell off the books because a year had passed since we had passed the recommendation to designate the property.
It was coming to a head, not too much in front of the Democratic Convention and the renominating convention, and I think it was politic on his part to just set it aside so that wouldn't be an issue to see whether he could hold on to his city council seat or not.
I think there's a possibility that a better proposal could come along and gain enough support to get passed, but that remains to be seen.
So instead of historic designation as a tool that will actually lock folks out, I don't understand why the city doesn't create a fund that helps families maintain those standards.
And I think that designation helps you feel an honor and feel kind of a pride about your community. And God knows, North Minneapolis gets slammed a lot, and we get put down a lot. And so for me, I thought, if Homewood is a historically designated important community, it makes people who live in our community feel proud about it and feel like, gosh, we really are important too. We're not just the neglected, bad neighborhood in Minneapolis.
I think preservation can be part of community revitalization and stabilization, but you have to recognize that whole story. If we had been talking about whether it's Homewood or any other designation, if we had started talking about that more recent history so that the residents can see themselves in that history, I think it would make a huge difference to how we can use preservation as stabilization. And the city needs more tools for preservation. Designation isn't the only tool out there, but it's the only one we have that we can use. But we need financial incentives. We need partnerships with community trusts. We need easements on properties. We need partnerships with nonprofits that can help fill vacant buildings. We need all of those other things that we just don't have tied to designation.